Good afternoon, it's Dr. Greg Emerson. It's May the 28th in the beautiful Northern Rivers area of New South Wales, Australia. I'm outside with my Pirates of the Caribbean coffee mug. When I was in Disneyland with my daughters, they ran off to get me a mug, came back with a Mickey Mouse one. I said, that's not really who your dad is. So they dashed off again and came back with a pirate one, which is a little bit more fitting. Today I've got it I use this in my Native American buffalo mug as my two main coffee mugs. Today we've got some really interesting news. We're going to talk about Michael Jordan and The Last Dance. We're going to talk about some medical studies, including the role of vitamin D and testosterone in men, why it helps, but it also doesn't help. We're going to talk about vitamin D and ADHD. We're going to talk about new research in cancer, how it metastasizes or spreads much earlier than we previously thought. We're going to talk about how the lymph nodes help protect us against that. And we're going to talk about Epstein Barr Virus and its role in cardiovascular disease. And finally, we're going to catch up with some really interesting cryptocurrency news. First, let's start off with Michael Jordan. So one of the really interesting things I picked up on was before the Bulls had become a incredibly successful franchise, a dynasty, while they were still building, there was a chance if they lost a game that they would get a better draft pick in the next draft. And so management decided that it wouldn't be a bad thing if they lost that game. Of course, that was completely and utterly contrary to Jordan's philosophy of sport and competition. And he said, we're not going to do that because I go hard and I go hard all the time. And in fact, the fact that the management were prepared to do that, Jordan said it soured his relationship with the Bulls management from that time on. And I think that's kind of the way I approach my health and fitness, is that it's not something I do part-time, it's not something I do on the weekends. It's a commitment for me on a daily basis that I'm going to look after my body, my mind and my spirit. So you can sometimes translate lessons from sport to lessons to health as well. Okay, let's have a look at some of the medical news because there's some really exciting stuff. Let's start off with the latest research on vitamin D and testosterone levels, and also that involves the prostate gland. So let's have a look at this latest study, which says, I quote, observational studies suggest an association between higher testosterone and serum vitamin D concentrations. Conversely, most randomized clinical trials that investigated the effect of vitamin D administration on testosterone levels have failed to detect any significant effect. With prostate support, the management of vitamin D status has been associated with a decreased prevalence of benign prostatic hyperplasia and symptoms. However, with prostate cancer, there is a paucity of evidence pertaining to vitamin D supplementation. Mechanistically, vitamin D exhibits essential roles in the testes and prostate. Otherwise, there is no apparent evidence to support the use of vitamin D supplementation to increase testosterone levels and to improve clinical outcomes related to the male reproductive system. So that's a little bit confusing at first glance, because it's saying the higher the level of vitamin D in your bloodstream, the less symptoms of benign prostatic hypertrophy you get, and higher the levels of the testosterone. But when we supplement with vitamin D, we don't get the same effect. So why is that? Well, the answer is obvious, and it's things I've been saying right from the start, is that we're meant to get vitamin D from the sun, not from a capsule. There's 1,000 benefits of sunlight, and if we are low in vitamin D, it means we're low in sunlight. And if you just take a vitamin D supplement, in my opinion, that's why I don't take a vitamin D supplement, you're only getting perhaps one of the benefits and not the other 999 that you're missing out on. Plus, you need sunlight to activate the vitamin D. So the lesson here is that if you take a vitamin D supplement, you're not going to get the same benefits for men with testosterone levels and men in their prostate glands as if you are going out in the sun. It's also a good idea for men to get their testicles in the sun because it absolutely helps with maximizing testosterone production. So, men in particular, well, everybody, the lesson is get your vitamin D from the sun and from the diet. Cod liver oil is also a good source of vitamin D. What happens if there's no sun? Well, sometimes you have to do what the animals do and head south for the winter. So take a break during winter to go on a holiday to somewhere where there is some sun, and during summer, because vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, get as much sun as you can and store acorns like chipmunks. You want to store vitamin D in your fat, which will then last you during your hibernation period of winter. Right, next let's have a look at vitamin D and ADHD. This recent study says the risk of ADHD was 34% higher in children whose mother had a vitamin D deficiency during pregnancy than in those children whose mother's vitamin D level was sufficient during the first and second trimesters. So what's the message there? Messages, and I've said this in multiple podcasts recently, is that pregnant women should get sun on their abdomen and sun on their vagina. And why is that? Well, we've already seen that during the first and second trimester, that reduces the risk of the infant's or the child's ADHD later in life. It also now has been shown that sun on the abdomen improves the microbiome of the mother and almost certainly then the microbiome of the fetus, which we now know the microbiome of the fetus is established while it's in uterus, long before it gets vaginally delivered, which we don't really know how that happens yet, and I find that fascinating. Also, the microbiome of the fetal lung is well established before it's born as well. We thought that was a sterile environment in that amniotic sac. And the other thing is getting the vagina in the sun is also really good, because if sunlight is good for the microbiome of the intestines, it's almost certainly going to be good for the microbiome of the vagina, and we now know that the healthier a female vaginal microbiome, the less risk of getting cervical cancer. So, pregnant woman, first and second trimesters, get out in the sun, get some sun on the abdomen. Next, let's have a look at cancer. Still the number 2 cause of death in Homo sapiens after cardiovascular disease. We've got to change something we're doing. Let's have a look at this study. So this study just out says that they have found evidence that suggests metastases of cancerous tumours may get its start much earlier than previously thought. Prior research has shown that metastases is the primary factor in cancer-related death. So metastases is when the cancer leaves its primary area and sends a shower of seeds of cancer cells out through the bloodstream to look for other places to grow. Unfortunately, despite massive amounts of effort by the medical science community, the natural history of metastases is still not very well understood, and neither is their clonal evolution. And as the researchers note, scientists still do not even really understand the impact that medical treatment has on metastasized tumours other than whether they are successful or not. In studying the data, the researchers found lower than expected numbers of clonal mutations in metastasized tumours, which they note suggested that seeding occurred early in the development of the secondary tumours, in some cases years earlier. The researchers also used a computational approach to create estimates of the time lag between when metastases seeding occurred in the patients under study and when a biopsy was first taken. They found it to be an average of 2 to 4 years. They suggest that the spread of such cancers can take place soon after transformation occurs in the original tumour, and that it can take many years to diagnose. I.e., what does that translate to? That translates to the fact that almost certainly after the cancer starts to develop, it starts seeding out cells. Remember, cancer is caused by the mutation in the DNA of the mitochondria, not the DNA of our cells, but in the mitochondria and the DNA of our mitochondria. And it's the cancer, in my opinion, and the opinion of many people, that cancer is a transformation of a cell in a toxic environment which is de-evolving into a more basic cellular type in order to survive. And once that process starts, like any organism, it starts to look for survival by reproducing, and there's this shower of metastasized cancer cells head out through the bloodstream and start forming metastases. And what this study is saying is it's happening long before we ever get to discover the primary tumor. So therefore, I think if cancer is the number one killer of Homo sapiens stills, we need to be doing something about the toxic environment of our bodies. And we need to be assuming that any cancer that we have is caused by toxic environment, which we need to clean up, and has metastasized very early. Therefore, we should be talking to our healthcare professional about natural and medical ways that we can have a metastases strategy as well as dealing with the primary tumor. Now, one of the prime mechanisms we have to protect ourselves, and the body, of course, in its infinite wisdom and its intelligent design, has put in a security system to help mitigate the spread of these cancerous cells throughout the body, and that's called our lymph nodes. Now, there's just been an interesting study out about the role of lymph nodes in cancer, and it says metastases can form in loco-regional lymph nodes draining the primary tumor, a form of progression that portends a worse prognosis, but can still be curable, or they can develop in distant organs. Our lymph nodes surround organs in our body where cancer might form, and if those cancers start to send a shower of seeds of cancer cells in the body, those lymph nodes are there to catch them before they get to other organs. The later case, when they develop in other organs, defines stage 4 disease, and treatments for it are typically considered palliative. That means that if the cancer cells escape beyond the lymph nodes and start forming in other organs other than the primary one, secondary organs, our success rate in treatment is much lower. It is unknown whether lymph node and distant metastases are only distinguished by their different prognostic implications, or whether the biology underlying their formation is also distinct. Reconstructing the evolutionary histories of dozens of primary colorectal cancers and their metastases, the team showed that lymph node metastases are a genetically highly diverse group, i.e. lots of different cancer cells are escaping, lots of different genetically different cancer cells are escaping the primary tumor and getting to the lymph node. Their pronounced heterogeneity indicates that they can be seeded by many different primary tumor sublineages. In contrast, so that's the metastatic cells that are caught in the lymph node. There's lots of different genetic forms of them. Yet, in contrast, distant metastases are homogeneous. They typically resemble each other and have a recent common ancestor, suggesting that fewer primary tumor cells possess the ability to form lesions in distant organs. Moreover, the genetic diversity within individual lymph node metastases is also higher than the genetic diversity within individual distant lesions. What that means is that our lymph glands are doing their job and they are catching almost all of the seeds, the metastatic cells released into the bloodstream, except a couple. And a couple of genetically different cells manage to get through that lymph gland. Not all of them get through, just a couple, and they start forming in the distant organs, stage 4 cancer. So what should we do? Well, we need to keep our lymph glands as healthy as possible, and we need to assume that they do a great job, but they're not 100% effective. Let's say they're able to filter out 99% of the genetically diverse cancer cells which gets disseminated through our body, except one gets through. As in Michael Jordan says, let's go back to Michael Jordan, it's not weekends, it's you're going hard every day, every time. And so we have to assume, if 1 in 2 of us are still dying of cancer, we have to assume that these processes are going on in our body. Everybody's got cancer cells. I got cancer cells, you've got cancer cells, but our body deals with them. And when that system to deal with them starts to fail, then that's when we develop cancer. So one of the things we should all do in cancer is look, why did our defense systems fail? This is not just a random event. The body has an intelligent design which deals with this process. And if we're getting cancer, then that system has failed. So not only do we have to treat the cancer, but you also have to look at why our defense system failed. And looking at our lymph nodes, it would be something you would want to talk to your healthcare professional about. And finally, we're going to talk about the role of Epstein Barr virus in cardiovascular disease. Epstein Barr virus is a herpes virus, it's not a coronavirus. It's, quote, ubiquitous in the human population, i.e. we've all had it, and now we know we almost still have it. And in most of us, it lies dormant in our bodies. Like anybody who gets a herpes sore on the lip, a cold sore, that most of us have got it. It's lying dormant in our bodies, not causing us any problems today, but occasionally in a few people that will not be contained, and you'll get higher levels of virus in people start getting cold sores. Well, now it turns out that Epstein Barr virus persists in the mouth of lots of us. And this study was looking at whether or not people who have Epstein Barr virus persisting in their mouth have an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Because if it's in the mouth, it's going to be through the body, and cardiovascular disease is caused by inflammation of our arteries. And our job is to find out in medicine or health to find out what's causing that inflammation, and persistent viral infections can be one. So they tested this hypothesis, and they found in the study that viruses are considered to be a newer family associated with inflammatory diseases. It's an interesting statement considering that viruses and bacteria, well, probably viruses were here first. They say that bacteria were the first life forms on Earth, and that was about let's going to say the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. They say bacteria were around after a billion years of the Earth starting, so that's at 3.5 billion years. And they were the first life form on Earth, and they ruled the planet for another billion years until 2.5 billion years, when they started to form a new life form, when the mitochondria were developed by a symbiotic event where one big bacteria consumed a smaller bacteria, and the smaller bacteria became the mitochondria of that new cell and started a whole new lineage of plants and fungi, which we come from. But they're not counting viruses, because viruses aren't traditionally thought to be alive. So when they say the first life form, that's true for bacteria. But viruses come from space. If you doubt that, just look at the New York Times article, which says it was surrounded by trillions of viruses in the air, and those are raining down on us from space. So viruses almost certainly, if they're in space, have been here a lot longer than all of us, including bacteria. So they were the original infections. Hang on, I got distracted. Let's go back to the start. Viruses are considered to be a newer family associated with inflammatory diseases. Yet the role of periodontal viruses in coronary artery disease remains unclear. Thus, the current study aims to evaluate the prevalence of periodontal viruses and compare the same in cardiac samples of coronary artery disease patients with and without periodontitis. Periodontitis is infections of the gums, which is why you'd want to have a really, really good oral health regime. And on my Facebook, Dr. Greg Emerson's Mitochondrial Biohacking page, and on my Patreon page, I outline my oral health strategy to keep down the level of these microbes in my mouth so they're not spreading to the rest of my body. I got distracted again. Let's keep going. The results revealed a higher prevalence of periodontal viruses such as Epstein Barr virus and cytomegalovirus in coronary artery disease patients with periodontitis, suggesting it was one of the risk factors for coronary artery disease, which means that people with cardiovascular disease, a lot more of them have these viruses in their mouth. This is supported by the fact that severity of periodontal disease is associated with the presence of Epstein Barr virus in coronary artery plaque. I'll say that again. Associated with the presence of Epstein Barr virus in coronary artery plaque samples in the current study. So what do we take that from that? We're taking the fact that viruses are one of the causes of inflammation of coronary artery disease. one of about 20 that I could name in 30 seconds. And that often those viruses are persistent in the mouth and infecting the gums, and that's where the viruses are being seeded from to cause the cardiovascular disease. So that's something to talk to your doctor about and your dentist about. If you've got cardiovascular disease, ask them to look into the role of Epstein Barr virus, and also adopt a comprehensive oral health regime, which you can talk to your healthcare professional or dentist about, or have a look at my Facebook mitochondrial medicine page, because the health of our mouth is directly tied to the health of our cardiovascular system. Okay, finally, let's have a look at a little bit of cryptocurrency news. I'm a adopter of cryptocurrency. I think it's the solution to a lot of our financial problems that we've got in, particularly fiscal stimulus, otherwise known as quantitative easing, where what seems to be unlimited money printing now is going to probably cause deflation for a while, followed by extraordinary hyperinflation, which we've seen in the world before. Weimar Germany experienced it. We haven't been able to in the past produce such unheralded amounts of money. That's why the 1920s depression happened, because the dollar was tied to gold and you can't print more gold. Now that it's not tied to gold anymore, we can print as much money as we like, causing hyperinflation. And cryptocurrencies were devised / invented during our last financial crisis as a solution to that excessive money printing. Now let's have a look at the news, because it's very exciting news, because a lot of countries have been slow or reluctant to embrace cryptocurrency because they haven't really understood it. But now we know that Africa, a lot of people in Africa are now embracing cryptocurrencies. Also, India has been a big adopter, China's been a big adopter, but India has regulated or banned its use for a long period of time. But some news out in the last couple of days says that India's central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, has confirmed that there is no longer any banking ban on crypto exchanges, companies or traders. This follows the Supreme Court decision to quash the RBI circular prohibiting banks from providing services to any customers dealing in cryptocurrencies. The ban lasted for almost 2 years. So this is great news for cryptocurrencies, that regulations are starting to be lifted. We want regulation in the cryptocurrency world. We want it to be a honest, powerful system, but we will regulate it ourselves rather than having governments regulate it. So this is very exciting news for adopters of cryptocurrencies. If you'd like any more information, if you've enjoyed today, make sure that you like the video. That helps YouTube know that you've liked it and that other people might want to see it. You can subscribe if you'd like to. You can follow me on my Facebook page, Dr. Greg Emerson's Mitochondrial Medicine and Biohacking page. And if you want to support me in the work I do and find out exactly what I'm doing in terms of my health, in terms of my oral regime, in terms of how I'm making sure I never get cancer, and what I'm doing with cryptocurrencies, you can follow me on my Patreon page, patreon.com/Dr. Greg Emerson. Until next week, thanks for watching and have a great day.